welcome, welcome. I am here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. Today is Saturday, a very nice day here in New York City, and I figured it was time to have yet another conversation with you, my friends, my family, my good supporters, the people that I deeply love as we struggle to find the truth in a world of lies and to get toward a constructive leftist message, a message not based on destruction, but based on building and trying to get towards something better. Shout out to Benjamin Carmine. I have not seen that name before, but you are welcome here to join us. Shout out to Kinky. Saw your message earlier. Glad you're here. Glad you're joining us. So much for us to discuss today. It is Saturday, and I am curious. What did you all think of the cover of the thumbnail, I should say, for the video? Rather than, I really like cities. I consider myself to be a city builder, and I like to use city skylines as kind of the thumbnail for these lives. And then lately, I've been doing futuristic city skylines because I think we should be looking to the future. But today, I thought I would go out on a limb and just take a picture of myself next to a white wall. And I had kind of a blank stare on my face. I was not, I was not trying to smile. I was trying to look distant. And I know one of my eyes was kind of wider than the other one. And I wanted to see what it was like. And we'll see if that attracts more people or not. Shout out to Jacob Maxey. Glad you're joining us. Shout out to Ricky. Glad you're joining us as well. So let's see. Let's see if that catches people's attention. The idea of me against a white wall staring off distantly. Shout out to Ramiro. Glad you're joining us. But as always, let's remember we want this to be a bigger conversation. We're doing a little bit of an experiment. Shout out to Libertas. And so, shout out to Tyler. Tweet this out. Post this on your Facebook. Make this a bigger conversation. Put it on the web, say, oh my gosh, can you believe what Caleb just said? Oh my gosh, watching Caleb right now. Make this a bigger conversation. The more people who watch me, the more people who hear me respond to your comments. The more people that are in on this, the more fun we all have. It's going to be a great night. It's just getting started. I'm going to try to go for as long as possible. Until I run out of material, until I feel like the energy has dropped, I'm going to go. I'm going to try to respond to as many of the comments that people leave as possible. Someone named New Ideas says we would have nothing without the worker, or the elites would have nothing without the worker. I agree with you, New Ideas. Keep up with your new ideas, New Ideas. Yes, so much to talk about today. But be sure to tweet this out. Be sure to bring more people. Make this a bigger conversation. So much to talk about here on Saturday night. My bookshelf is behind me. The lights are shining in my face. I have got plenty of throat oil and or water to drink. And we have an interesting new thumbnail of me looking off into the distance. So plenty to discuss. Let's have fun. It should be a fun evening for all. So, I know that the big thing that is on everyone's mind is the Trump tariffs on China. Tariff forces U.S. businesses to recalibrate. Now, a couple things that I wanted to mention about these tariffs. Now, people know that I am an outspoken critic of the Trump tariffs on China. I think that they're a bad move. They're not good for the United States. They are not good for China. They are not good for the world economy. But there's a couple things I want to make. First of all, one of the architects of this theory of economic nationalism is an individual by the name of Steve Bannon. And in fact, he gave a speech to the Black Business Owners Association in Washington, D.C. This was last year. He gave a speech to the Black Business Owners Association in order to promote economic nationalism. And in his speech, he's going over why you need economic nationalism. And this speech is broadcast, mind you, on C-SPAN. So millions of people probably saw it. And lo and behold, in this speech, Steve Bannon, I've made a video where I cut the video of Steve Bannon talking and directly refute this, but But one of the points he makes in his speech is he says, at the Communist Party's, Congress, President Xi gave a speech and said that their economic war with the United States is over and they won. And that is a bold-faced lie. President Xi Jinping's speech to the Chinese Communist Party's National Congress is on the internet. You can watch the video, you can read the transcript. At no point in the speech did President Xi ever make any reference to an economic war against the United States. The speech is on the internet. You can watch it. You can read the transcript. At no point did President Xi ever make any reference to an economic war with the United States. In fact, the speech says the opposite. It calls for a win-win cooperation relationship with countries around the world. It calls for improved relations. It makes the point that China is not trying to export its political system around the world. The speech does not make any reference to a war against the United States, which they claim to have won. Steve Bannon lied. He lied. And that's very easy to see. Steve Bannon just made that up. He says that President Xi says something in a very important speech to the National Congress of the Communist Party of China. He didn't say it. We've got video to confirm this. You can watch the speech for yourself. You can read the transcript for yourself. Steve Bannon got up in front of the Black Business Owners Association. Steve Bannon's white, mind you. I'm just throwing that out there. He happened to be speaking at the Black Business Owners Association, but he's white. He's on C-SPAN, broadcast nationally, telling people that the president of China said something that he did not say. At no point has China ever called for an economic war against the United States. That just didn't happen. Just didn't happen. So Steve Bannon, one of the architects of this theory of economic nationalism, that's what they're calling it. I think that's a little bit generous. One of the people pushing for things like this tariff on China, lo and behold, says things that are just blatantly not true. And I don't think that Steve Bannon's an idiot. I don't think he's stupid, right? It's very easy to get on the internet and look at that speech by President Xi Jinping of the Chinese Communist Party and see what he said. Very easy to do. You can get on there. You can very easily look at what President Xi said. And he did not say that he wanted an economic war with the United States. He did not say that. Didn't happen. Shout out to Lisa Hauserman, by the way. So Steve Bannon's, speech making the case for economic nationalism contained falsehoods. And if you haven't seen it, I'll post it later, but you can see it. But it's a video I made a while back where I showed that Steve Bannon's speech to the Black Business Association, where he's talking about economic nationalism, is full of deceptions. So that needs to be made. But there's another couple points I want to make. First of all, so this article in today's Wall Street Journal, the weekend edition, it goes over some key aspects of these new tariffs that Trump has put on China. Here's one. While the 10% tariff levied in September had little effect on parts pricing, this is auto parts, the auto sector lobbyists said an increase of 25% could push up manufacturers' costs for cars assembled in the U.S. using imported parts. The higher duty could also increase the price for car owners, replacing worn-out parts, some of which are mostly built in China. More than 1,000 Chinese companies export auto parts to U.S. companies and retailers of replacement parts. The U.S. import of about $10 billion in parts from China annually, according to Boston Consulting Group study. So here's the thing. The auto industry. Folks know about the auto industry, which Barack Obama bailed out during the financial crisis, right? Bailed out, where the U.S. government bought the stock, and it was stock that was non-voting stock. It was conservatorship. The right wing tried to portray it as if it was as a nationalization, but it wasn't a nationalization. It was simply a bailout. It was an auto bailout, right? The auto bailout, the big three automotive companies in the United States, the staple American industries, Motown, whatnot, right? They increasingly import parts from China, right? And let's also add to it that China is the world's largest car market at this point. No other country in the entire world sells as many cars at this point, buys as many cars as China does. The Chinese people, as they're rising up out of poverty, as more and more of them are getting to the point that they can buy their own family car, lo and behold, China is the biggest car market in the entire world. And mind you, yes, they make a lot of cars in China. And in fact, electric cars are a big deal in China now. The new energy vehicles, they're requiring that 10% of all the cars made in China, now it's up to 20%, 20% of all the cars made in China be new energy vehicles. All the cars, 20% of the cars that are imported to China be new energy vehicles. But increasingly, the kind of cars that Chinese people import from the United States are luxury cars, like Cadillacs, right? A lot of Chinese billionaires, millionaires, they think, hey, I want to be able to drive a Cadillac. So they buy Cadillacs that are made in Michigan, right? To put a barrier between the United States, and the fastest growing economy in the world and the world's biggest car market is a really, really dumb move. As China becomes the cutting edge of electric car technology, as they're pioneering new ways of making batteries, and just doing everything they can to try and get off of fossil fuels, to really just allow new energy vehicles to to just grow and blossom as a new alternative. Why in the world would you want to put up a barrier between the United States and China, right? Especially with the auto industry being such a big part of what's left of American industry. It's a ridiculous move, right? All these Chinese billionaires who love to buy their Cadillacs, if you put up a barrier, pretty soon they're not going to be buying Cadillacs anymore. And all those workers, those auto workers in Michigan who make those Cadillacs are going to be out of a job. It's a stupid move. Another thing, the higher tariffs will impact Chinese-made solar inverters, a piece of electrical equipment that converts the output of solar panels into alternating current, right? And at this point, the article doesn't mention this, but at this point, China is the world's top manufacturer of solar panels. Nobody makes, makes solar panels the way the Chinese do. So, lo and behold, we're going to put up a wall between us and the country that is innovating solar energy and solar technology like nobody else. Again, is this a smart move? Now, this is being framed as economic nationalism. That's what it's being framed as. However, if you read further in the article, is the result of this that we're all going to be making all our solar panels in the United States? No. Because many inverter makers have already begun to shift manufacturing away from China, and in anticipation of higher tariffs, the residential market for solar inverters are expected to open plants in the United States, right? Trump's bringing the jobs back, right? No. In Mexico and Vietnam this year, said Jeffrey Osborne, analyst at Cohen Incorporated. So basically, Trump's tariff on China is not creating jobs in the United States. It's creating jobs in Mexico. It's creating jobs in Vietnam, right? This is not really about helping the United States. It's not about helping American workers. It's about putting the American workers who benefit from trade with China, specifically the agricultural sector, as well as those Cadillac workers who are making Cadillacs that all these new Chinese millionaires and billionaires are buying. It's about putting their jobs in jeopardy, and it's about waging economic warfare against China. It's not for America, it is against China. That's what you need to remember about this. One of the big things that Tim Leitheiser and those guys that are on the White House Trade Council continue to emphasize is they hate Made in China 2025. And what is Made in China 2025? It is a huge amount of spending by the Chinese government on investing in new technology. The Chinese government is rolling out all kinds of money to fund research laboratories and universities in R&D, research and development, to try and make computer breakthroughs, better advances in artificial intelligence, better advances in computer technology, smartphone technology. That's what Made in China 2025 is. Now, it's being portrayed as a sinister plot by the Chinese government to take over the world technology market. But here's a little detail that has been left out. China has reached out to the United States on repeated occasions and said, why don't we make Made in China 2025 a joint venture? That's right. They have said, why don't we make Made in China 2025 a joint venture between American companies and Chinese companies, American universities and Chinese universities, American tech labs and Chinese labs. They want Made in China 2025 to be collaborative, mutually beneficial. They have tried to include the United States in this plan. So if it is indeed a vast conspiracy If it is a vast conspiracy against the United States, why are they trying to include the United States in it? The facts don't back this up, right? This is essentially an effort to punish China. To punish China for pioneering scientific breakthroughs. They don't like the fact that China is using so much of its government resources to fund science and to fund breakthroughs. They don't like it. Why? Because China is pointing the way out of the fossil fuel-based global order. Let me repeat that. China is pointing the way out of the fossil fuel-based global order. Who rules the world, folks? Who rules the world? Who are the richest people in the world? I've often asked that question. Who are the richest people in the world? Now, according to Forbes, and according to what you'll read on Wikipedia and on the internet, the richest person in the world is Jeff Bezos. Some people will say the richest person in the world is Jeffrey Sachs. Some people will say that the richest person in the world is who? Who do they name? They name Carlos Slim, the Mexican billionaire. They name sometimes some Arab prince or sultan. That's a load of nonsense, folks. Those people are so poor. Jeff Bezos, Jeffrey Sachs, Carlos Slim are so poor that they have to keep their money in their own name. The reason that they are on paper the richest people is because they are so poor that they keep their money in their own name. Look at the Rockefeller family. No one knows how much money that they have. No one knows how much money they have because their actual wealth is incalculable, right? In their own name, sure, they have a few $billion. They also exercise control via a bunch of trusts over a huge sector of the banking corporations in the United States. Manhattan Bank, J.P. Morgan Chase, that's the Rockefellers. Plus, you can throw in there ExxonMobil. That's the modern day result. That's the modern descendant of Standard Oil, started by John D. Rockefeller. There is no way to calculate how much money the Rockefeller family has. The individuals in that family, no one can even figure out how much money they have, right? If you add in ExxonMobil, if you add in, J.P. Morgan Chase, if you add in the number of trusts that they control, the number of nonprofit foundations they control, the amount of wealth that these people have is beyond anything we can even comprehend. So they're not on paper listed as the richest people in the world because it's not even all in their own name. They control such a huge, elaborate network of wealth. When a member of the Rockefeller family was being confirmed in hearings by the U.S. Congress, all these great journalists, there's a very good book called The Rockefeller Syndrome. All these great journalists in the United States tried to figure out how much money this Nelson Rockefeller had, and none of them could figure it out because it was the amount of money they have is astounding, right? The Morgan family. That's the family that started General Electric. The Morgans. Same story. They have so much money. There is no way of calculating. It's beyond calculation. Someone asked about the Rothschilds. Sure, the Rothschild family, the banking dynasty in Britain, that's tied in with Shell Oil and Noble Oil and BP. Again, you cannot calculate how much money these people have. The actual ruling class, the entrenched circles of power in the United States that have so much money, right? Who are they? They're oil bankers. They're oil bankers, right? The Rockefeller family, John D. Rockefeller, that started out with Standard Oil, now it's ExxonMobil, now it's Chase Bank, right? The Rothschilds, the banking dynasty that got in on BP and Shell Oil, that actually had oil fields in Azerbaijan at the time of the Russian Revolution, and the British troops were sent to fight the Soviet Union to seize their oil fields. The Carnegies, the DuPonts, the Gettys, the oil banking dynasties, the oil banking elite that runs the United States has so much money we can't believe it. And they sit at the top of a global financial order. A global financial order centered around the fact that they control the oil. Oil is everything in our economy today. Just like in the Old South. The Old South, before the fall of slavery, they used to say cotton is king in the South. Because the entire economy of the South, the slave plantation system was all about cotton. Everything else kind of just depended on cotton. Well, in the global economy of the 21st century and of the 20th century, It's all about oil. Oil is king. Oil is king in the global order that they've set up, right? You got the big four super majors in the United States: BP, Chevron, Shell, and ExxonMobil, right? ExxonMobil being the top one, the other three being almost on their level, but not completely there. On top of that, you have got the vassal state of Saudi Arabia, which is basically a middleman for the big four oil companies. You've got the United Arab Emirates. You've got Kuwait. You've got all these Middle Eastern autocracies, dictatorships, kingdoms, right, that were set up. You can go back to the Sykes-Picot Agreement, where the British and the Americans and the French sat there and carved up the Middle East and picked who was going to rule. Right? The Sykes-Picot Agreement, you've got these dynasties, these oil plantations, these kingdoms that were set up in the Middle East. You've got the Nigerian government, which is very much controlled by Shell Oil and ExxonMobil and Chevron and BP, right? The Nigerian government, it's very, very corrupt and is presiding over, at this point, the largest export of oil in any African country, aside from a few outliers. The global oil market is cornered by Wall Street and London. And it is, right? I mean, now there are exceptions. You got Venezuela, a country that has seized control of its oil resources. You've got the Islamic Republic of Iran. You've got Russia, which is a huge, huge oil exporting country that is independent. But aside from them, right, lo and behold, aside from them, the global oil markets are controlled by the oil banking elite of the United States. And it's very, very convenient for them. Why? Every time someone gets on a plane, oil. Every time someone drives a car, oil. Every piece of plastic that you have, that's oil. Oil is everything. Oil is king, and they control the oil markets. And China has very little domestic oil. They have some, but they don't have enough. They depend on foreign oil imports. The Chinese need to import oil. And they realize that this is a weakness because the oil markets are controlled, for the most part, by the Western oil banking, capitalist, global financial system. So China has been very, very hard trying to get out of dependency on fossil fuels. And that is why they are pioneering solar energy. That is why they are funding projects like Made in China 2025. Because they want to have technological breakthroughs that will get us out of the nightmare of oil. That's why China is pushing nuclear power. Nuclear power. China is all about nuclear power because, again, it's getting us out of the oil business. The oil-based economy is a trap. It's a trap that Wall Street and London have set up where they control the world economy. Everyone has to do business with them. All roads lead to Rome. And you'll notice that most of the wars that we have seen have been enforcing that global order. We invaded Iraq, a country with a state-run oil company that was selling oil in competition with Wall Street and London. The United States toppled and overthrew and bombed the government of Libya, another independent country with an independent state-run oil company that was overthrown. The meddling in Venezuela, the sanctions on Russia, the attacks on Iran, oil, oil, oil. Right? That's what it's all about. Right? There's a reason that the West was so supportive of Israel and creating Israel. Why? Because they needed to have an ally, a base, a base of support for Western capitalism in the Arab world in case there was some kind of uprising. They saw what was happening with Abdel Nasser, the Arab socialist leader. They saw what was happening with Ba'athist Arab socialism. And so Israel, the West was very, very supportive of the project to create Israel so they could have a base of support in that Middle Eastern region. Oil, oil, oil. The global economy is centered around oil, and it's bad for the environment, and it's not good. Oil is not good. We need to get away from the oil-based economy. It's a trap, number one, but it's also just bad, right? It's polluting our environment. It's just not good. The oil-based economy is something we need to get away from. But we're not going to get away from it because these folks have got the market cornered, lo and behold. So China is trying to push new technology, and China is trying to push new energy sources, and they can't stand it. You'll notice that some of these tariffs that have been put on China specifically target things like nuclear power, things like technological research, things like solar panels. They don't like the fact that China, as it expands economically, as it expands and it starts trading with countries in Africa and South America, is doing everything it can to get out of the oil-based global order. That's basically what China is trying to do, and Wall Street and London cannot stand it. And that this trade war is not about protecting American jobs, it's not about protecting Americans, it's about waging war. It is about an open economic attack on China in the hopes of beating down their efforts to get us out of the oil-based global order. That's what the attack on China is about. It is not a trade war to protect American jobs. It's only about hurting China. That's all it's about. And at the end of the day, the reason that they want to stop China is because they see that with the end, if they were to end that fossil fuel-based economy, right? If we were to get out of the trap of the fossil fuel-based economy, if that were to happen, then the days of Wall Street and London ruling the world would be over, right? All roads would no longer lead to Rome. We would not need to trade. They would not need to be the center of the economy, right? That's what's going on here. That's what this economic war against China is about. And let's go over something else, right? The South China Sea. Okay, so first of all, right, you'll remember that every time there would be some kind of, American aircraft would get close to a Chinese ship, or a Chinese ship would get close to an American aircraft and all this, we'd be hearing China's taking over the South China Sea. China's, what they're doing in the South China Sea. Here's the thing. Okay, so it's the South China Sea. Right? And we're angry that the United States, which is on the other side of the world, is not having the same amount of leverage in the South China Sea. Okay? Now, how would we feel, in the United States if there was a huge amount of ships from China in the Gulf of Mexico? We wouldn't be too happy about it. But put that point aside. Why is the South China Sea so important to China? Because the oil that they get, most of it comes on oil tankers that comes to the port in Shanghai. In South China, there is a port in the city of Shanghai, and that's where their oil tankers come from. And right now, China is dependent on oil, right? And as their economy expands, and as their apparatus of production expands, at this point, China makes half of the steel in the world. China has the biggest telecommunications manufacturer in the world, Huawei. As China expands its role in the global economy, it starts using more resources. Those oil tankers that come from the South China Sea are very, very important. And if the USA ever wanted to just go in there and shut China down, all they would have to do is put their forces in the South China Sea. Naval blockade, and the lights go out on the mainland. And China knows that, right? That, yes, they get some oil from Russia, and they're increasing their natural gas usage, and that's also Russia's a major natural gas country. But overall, China needs those oil tankers to keep coming through the South China Sea. And that's why China desperately wants to get out of the oil-based global economy, because it makes them vulnerable. And that's why China has been working with the government of Nicaragua to build a canal that would counter the Panama Canal. Right? That's another project that they've been doing there. And you'll notice the USA has been funding and stirring up dissent and protests in Nicaragua, trying to destabilize there because they don't like the fact that the socialist government there is working with China to build a new canal, right? The U.S. controls the Panama Canal. Now, they don't mess with it, but if things got intense, they could block it. And any oil tanker and any shipping that would go through there would have to get the U.S. permission. Folks will remember back in 2013, there was a ship from Cuba going to North Korea. The USA stopped it, inspected it, discovered that North Korea was sending weapons or that Cuba was sending weapons to North Korea. It was a big international incident. Why? Because the USA controls the Panama Canal, and they stopped and frisked that ship, and they found what was going on there. The USA controls the Panama Canal. China is working with Nicaragua to try and change that. The high seas are very important. That's where the oil that is the basis of the U.S. economy, that's where a lot of it goes through. It goes through on the high seas, on oil tankers, right? Oil pipelines are a big deal. Russia is trying to build an oil pipeline into Germany, but a natural gas pipeline as well, Nord Stream 2. But overall, the way the oil trade goes down is on the high seas. It's in the oceans. And that brings me to the latest developments around Iran. So, as folks will know, the USA is escalating its military presence in the Middle East right now, in the Straits of Hormuz. And they say this is because of Iranian threats to the United States. Well, here's the thing. For folks who haven't noticed, the USA has declared that they are going to bring Iranian oil exports down to zero. Right? Iran, its entire economy is centered around selling oil on the international markets. The USA has declared that it is going to bring their oil exports down to zero. Now, they gave eight waivers to countries. Those waivers have expired, and the USA has announced they're going to stop an oil-based country from selling its oil. And so now the USA is pouring its military into the Strait of Hormuz and into the Middle Eastern region on the grounds that they're doing this because there is a threat to the United States. Think about that for a minute, right? We are basically announcing, the United States, I shouldn't say we, but the U.S. government is basically announcing it's going to stop an entire country's economy from functioning, right? You know, a country whose biggest source of wealth is oil exports. You're going to stop them from importing oil. But somehow they're the ones that are a threat. I mean, let's be real about this, right? I mean, and oil tankers are very important. So as the U.S. pours its military presence into that region, it looks like they're going to be trying to stop Iranian oil tankers. That's what it's looking like, right? And this is a very, very intense situation, right? And we should all keep our eyes on it. Don't forget the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. It was the basis of the Vietnam War. It turns out it wasn't that the Vietnamese attacked the U.S. ship. It was a big lie. I mean, the sea provocations are a big deal in escalating international tension. Let's be absolutely real about that. So that's how you can understand what's going on in the world today, is you need to understand that there is the oil-based global order centered around Wall Street in London, and there is China, and China is at the center of a number of countries that are trying to break out of that international system. They're trying to break out of the oil-based global order. And in order to do that, they're funding new technology. And the pessimists of the Wall Street, London, global financial system of imperialism, right? That's what Lenin referred to it as when he talked about the rise of trusts and cartels and seizing parts of the world as spheres of influence. You know, imperialism, which is capitalism in its monopoly stage, the economic system that Lenin wrote about so beautifully in his book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. You know, the countries that are breaking out of that are facing an onslaught from a Western global order that is pessimistic. Right? The Wall Street and London global order, they don't want history to keep moving. If history keeps advancing, they're going to lose their position as rulers of the world. If technology keeps advancing, we're not going to be depending on oil any longer. If the major centers of economic power start functioning in a rational way and not for profits, they'll be losing out. Basically, you have an elite group running the world, financially, controlling it via the oil markets, via control of the banking centers, via control of the Western economic, centers. And they are trying their best to stop history from moving forward. And that's why pessimism and the belief that there is no hope for the future, the belief that we've gone too far with human progress, that's why that's everywhere in the West, because that's how the people who rule the Western countries feel. They think that the future is bleak. The future offers them no hope. If history keeps advancing, they lose. So of course they're reeking of pessimism and hopelessness. And there's different incarnations of it, right? There is left-wing pessimism, right? Global warming is going to kill us all. The human population is too high. Everyone is racist, sexist, and homophobic, and we need to just go back to living in huts. And there's that left-wing pessimism. The right-wing pessimism, we've gotten away from Jesus. We've gotten away from the Bible. We've gotten away from real capitalism, and so lo and behold, pessimism. The Western centers are now centers of pessimism. They are sending pessimism across the planet. We've gone too far. Stop building. Start tearing things down. Start looking backward. This is basically what's coming out of the Western world. Whereas China and Russia, I have gone to some conferences in Russia where I meet people from all over the world. Optimism, right? I went to the Yalta Economic Forum in Crimea. Business owners from China, business owners from Syria, business owners from Latin America, from Central Asia. Optimism. Let's go build something. We've got governments that want us to go out and build. Optimism is flowing out of Eurasia right now. The alternative on the global economy centered around Russia and China. You got the Bolivarian countries. You got Iran. You've got many different countries around the world that have broken out of the Western financial system. They're talking optimism. They're talking about building. They're talking about construction. Whereas what's coming out of the Western world is pessimism. We've gone too far. It's the Tower of Babel. Stop building. People's lives are too good. Oh my God, it's awful. Let's go backward. Let's look backward. Death and destruction is coming. Armageddon is coming. There's two different worldviews here. Optimism versus pessimism. City builders versus vandals, right? That's the mindsets that are clashing on the global stage right now. Optimism versus pessimism, construction versus destruction. That's the battle that is waging across the planet right now between two different views of the world, two different views of the future, two different operatives, two different modes of production, economies that are centered around the state and economies that are centered around profits, countries where the government controls the corporations and forces them to work in the interests of the nation, and countries where the governments are controlled by the businesses, and the businesses and corporations control the government, and the government simply is obedient to the highest bidder and to the corporations, right? Is it the rule of the dollar, or is the state controlling the economy? That is the clash. That is geopolitics in our time, right? It's not the Cold War anymore. It's not Marxism, Leninism versus Western systems. It's not traditional conservatism versus far left. That's outdated. We are in a clash between real material forces. That's the world that we live in. That is the battle of the 21st century that is waging across the globe. Is history allowed to advance? Does human progress exist, or have we gone too far and should we quit while we're ahead? Should we start deconstructing human civilization, or should we allow it to advance? Oh boy, I have said a lot. And I know there's a lot of people like Hernan Montagna, right? Time to invest in cryptocurrency. I don't know enough to comment there. A lot of you have a lot to say. I'm going to start responding to that. But wow, that's the situation we're in. Wrong kind of green, says Christopher Samanchik. Well, and again, I'm not anti-environmental. Global warming is real. It is a real threat. I believe we are experiencing global climate change, these super hurricanes. It's a real threat. But the answer, folks, to global warming is scientific progress. It's what China is doing, funding new research, funding new energy sources, new technology. The answer is not to go backward. The answer is further progress. We need to get to the point that our global economy and our global apparatus of production functions in such an organized way that it coordinates and we are able to function in a renewable energy way, right? And that means a planned economy. Now, Tim is asking me, do you think capitalism will collapse or does it need to be overthrown? Well, here, Tim, the problem with that question is, what does collapse mean? Now, civilizations can collapse, sure. Countries can collapse, economies can collapse, but capitalism is a mode of production based on profits. It's when the economy is centered around production for profit. And that doesn't just go away. The entire United States could collapse tomorrow, and capitalism would still be there. The entire Western world could collapse, but as long as you have production for profit, you still have capitalism. So, a collapse would not end capitalism. The capitalism ends when there is a conscious choice by society to seize control of the major centers of economic power and start organizing the economy in a rational way. So it's not an either or, right? There very well could be a society collapse. These things happen, right? I mean, we're in such a massive deconstruction in the West right now, where we've just really doubled down on this belief that individualism is the highest good, that individualism should be prioritized above all else, that any form of group collective identity or community obligation is somehow fascistic and totalitarian. It's possible there could be a society collapse. I mean, I'm not predicting it happening tomorrow, and these things don't happen immediately. I mean, societal collapses are very gradual. But regardless, that wouldn't end capitalism. So to answer your question, it's not an either or, right? I think overall that while capitalism will not collapse, I think that moving towards socialism might be the only thing that could prevent Western countries from having a society-wide collapse, right? I think moving towards socialism is the only thing that will prevent the West from further moving closer toward a state of collapse. But I don't think that a collapse would end capitalism. I think that in a collapse, especially, capitalism becomes unleashed because there's no state. In a state of collapse, you see state power kind of dissolving, right? People talk about the fall of the USSR, the fall of Eastern Europe, and how, there was utter chaos, and that's real capitalism. That's the libertarian fantasy, right? After the fall of the Soviet Union, you had a period in Russia where big corporations weren't paying taxes. They just weren't paying taxes. At this, I mean, the state had no ability to force corporations to pay taxes at one point, right? The fall of the Soviet Union, you saw a collapse basically, and the result of it was capitalism on steroids. That capitalism doesn't collapse. Capitalism, by definition, is the irrationality of production, production for profit. That doesn't collapse. In fact, when societies crumble and fall apart, it escalates. And it's just people trying to make money. And when there's no state centralizing things, when there's no central vision or plan for a society, when everything is just kind of crumbling, the capitalism flourishes, and people think, okay, there's nothing holding me back, and corporations do whatever they can, and restraints are lifted. So I think that is not exactly, that's not exactly the point. But there are plenty of other things to talk about. One thing that I like, folks, about the Bernie Sanders movement is the slogan that they've raised, "Not me, us." I think it's beautiful. It's a great slogan because basically it's saying that we need to have a collectivist mindset in the United States, that individualism is not the highest good, that we need to have some kind of group identity. Not me, us. I like that. When I see crowds of young Bernie-crats chanting, "Not me, us, not me, us," I like that. That's the beginning of changing the way Americans think and pointing toward us actually building something. Nick Gallo says the people's will. Exactly, the will of the people, right? Having some kind of feeling that we are part of something bigger than ourselves. That's a basic human need. Talk to any psychologist. Human beings are not tigers. They're not lone predators running through the woods, hunting for prey. Human beings are tribal creatures. The desire to be part of something bigger than yourself, the desire to pass on something better to your children and to the next generation, the desire to have higher ideals and principles, the desire to be part of a group, the desire to engage in joint effort. This is basic human need. Human beings need to be part of something. They really do. They need to be part of a group. They need to be part of a vision. They need to be part of a process, right? When you just tell people you're on your own, right? That's the basis for all kinds of problems. And I wanted to add, I figured I'd work this in here somewhere. Wall Street Journal. This article just takes the cake. The most anxious generation goes to work, right? Young people in the United States are more anxious and more unwell psychologically than any generation that we've seen in recent history. College presidents and deans tell him repeatedly that they've had to make managing students' anxiety and other mental health issues a priority. Quote, "They're overwhelmed with demand for mental health services on their campuses. I hear this again and again. It is really striking," says Mike Fenlon, chief people officer for Princeton Waterhouse Coopers, where he hires thousands of college grad students every year. 54% of workers under 23 said that they felt anxious or nervous due to stress in the preceding months, according to the 2018 American Psychological Association survey of 3,458 adults 18 and over. Close behind are the millennials. That's my generation. I'm not Generation Z. And 40% of them reported anxiety, with a national average of 34%. The young people who have grown up in the aftermath of the fall of the Soviet Union, being told that capitalism and the rule of the dollar is permanent, that socialism failed everywhere it's ever been tried, and no man is an island, and individualism shall reign forever, and every man for himself, and the government is best that governs least. Those who grew up in the era of neoliberalism, right, are especially these young people from Generation Z. They are the most anxious and unhappy generation that we have. And the workplaces of the world are trying to figure out how to brace themselves for this generation of young people that are not well psychologically pouring into them. There's an article about that in the Wall Street Journal. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. Think on that one, right? If you think that, we have really doubled down on this in the United States, right? I mean, over the last few decades, we have gotten more neoliberal and free market and capitalist than ever before, right? Schools for profit, right? Who would have thought of that? Schools for profit, charter schools, where a private corporation gets paid per student. Schools for profit, prisons for profit. Who would have thought of that, right? Corporations can make money by locking people in jail. Who would have ever guessed, right? And, lo and behold, military contractors, right? Why do we need to maintain an army to fight our wars? Some big government program. Why don't we just have Blackwater and Academy and private companies do it? We have doubled down on this neoliberalism stuff. This is, all these people that think the USA is socialist, or we've got, it's entitlement program. I mean, the USA is about as free market as you can get in the Western world. We have privatized about everything you can privatize. I mean, and it's at the point that they're unpaving the roads. They are unpaving the roads in municipalities across the country because, the governments cannot afford to maintain roads, right? I mean, it's getting ridiculous. We have really doubled down on free markets and neoliberalism. And as a result, our economy is crumbling, right? I mean, we are seeing an overall drop in our standard of living. Our water is not being properly purified, right? Our power plants. I wanted to talk about this. There was just a gas station explosion in Virginia. A gas station blew up and people died, right? A gas station exploded. That reminded me of what happened during Hurricane Sandy here in New York City. Hurricane Sandy, as you will recall, here on the Lower East Side, the Con Ed plant, power plant that generates power for the Lower East Side of New York City, kaboom! It blew up, right? Couldn't stand a little rain, couldn't stand a hurricane, kaboom, the power plant blew up. We keep seeing things like this all across the United States, where the infrastructure of the United States, I mean, look at Puerto Rico. That's a U.S. territory that was left without electricity for 11 months because of a hurricane. Hurricane happened, and we couldn't get the power back on in Puerto Rico for 11 months, right? And when the electricity goes out for 2 days in Venezuela, it's all because of socialism, right? It proves that, come on, right? I mean, this is what's happening. That overall, society in the United States is not functioning the way it should. Right? You need a central vision. You need state power. And individualism and free markets and privatizations and people making profits is escalating to a dangerous, dangerous level. Social deconstruction, where we tell people you're an individual and all of these things that hold society together are all just a bunch of lies. It's taking things to a very, very, very dangerous, dangerous place. These are scary times that we live in. Now, Cayuza is mentioning the mass shootings, and that's a very interesting phenomenon too. I mean, that's pretty horrendous. These mass killers. You read them. A lot of them are young white supremacists, right? They're reading, hateful stuff, and they're bitter, and they write these big manifestos, and they're hoping that they can end their life in a hail of death and destruction, and then be immortalized with a Wikipedia page about how they killed so many people. It's scary stuff. We're living in scary times, and again, the deconstruction is extreme. And that's why I'm optimistic when I hear people saying, not me, us. Not me, us. That's how societies work. That's how human beings have made so many things. Do you think the pyramids were built by people just doing their own thing? No. Right? That if you look at the history of human civilization, all the beautiful things, all the beautiful cathedrals, all the beautiful works of art, all the beautiful pieces of music, everything that's been done, everything that has been beautiful about civilizations ever has been done by human beings cooperating. The reason that we're able to take dirt and sand and rocks and turn it into the iPhone that I am using to broadcast this all over the world is because human beings have cooperated. That's a fact. Human cooperation, collaboration, collectivism, that's what human beings are all about. And sure, freedom is good. You need people to be able to say what they want. And as society gets to be more stable, and the level of material abundance increases, you can have a greater level of social freedom, but you still need to have a society. You still need to have an overall collective vision. And the deconstruction and the neoliberalism and the postmodernism is taking things to a very, very dangerous, dangerous place. Oh boy. Now, another thing that I wanted to talk about is, now, I don't know if folks have seen, but North Korea has launched a couple more missile tests. And, you know, lo and behold, we're being told, oh, you know, this shows that North Korea is warlike. They had no intention of giving up their nuclear weapons. And I would disagree with that. I'd say that these missile tests are happening because North Korea feels like, hey, we offered to talk. We were trying to negotiate to give up our nuclear weapons. And lo and behold, you know, the talks didn't go anyplace, right? The first summit was a success. And the second summit, they didn't even stay for lunch. I mean, it was a disaster, according to the reports that came out, right? And the Singapore summit was a big deal. Trump got a handshake and a photo opportunity, and they came out with their 4-point plan or whatever. Second one in Vietnam, they didn't even finish. They did not even finish. They did not even finish their meeting. They didn't even stay for lunch. I mean, it was just over. It was done, finished, boom. Well, you know, when you negotiate, both sides have to give. And if North Korea is just told, yeah, you have to disarm, and they're like, and we want, yeah, you have to disarm, and they're like, yeah, but we want, you know, that's not a negotiation. And also, it should be noted that the North Korean embassy in Spain was violently attacked. I bet people didn't see that in American media. It didn't get a lot of play. But yes, the embassy of North Korea was violently attacked by individuals that, according to the Spanish press, are all seem to be tied to the CIA. So while there was negotiations going on, there was then an attack on the embassy. And it looks to me, Trump, and I've said this before, I think that on some level, Trump's ego is involved here. Right? It's happening. China is bringing North and South Korea together, right? China is so deeply tied into both countries, right? Russia wants to industrialize the Far East. They had the Far East Economic Forum in Vladivostok, right? And that area of the world, right? The Far East of Russia, China, North Korea, South Korea, they really want to bring it together economically, right? And there's a huge amount of potential for economic development there. They want to bring that area into the 21st century, start lighting it up with electricity, start building things, you know, the Russian agricultural sector. I mean, they want to make that area much more economically prosperous. And it's going to happen eventually, right? I mean, they've already got train access between North and South Korea. No trains yet because there's no trade because of the sanctions. But it's going to happen. North Korea is going to be brought into the global economy. Trump would like to be a big part of that. I think that's a lot of what's motivating things here. Trump wants his name on it. Trump did it. Well, Trump didn't do it. Eurasia did it. Russia and China will have done it. But Trump wants to get credit for it. And on top of that, when North Korea opens up, he doesn't want just Russia and China to get all the business deals in North Korea. I think that Trump very much wants American companies and American companies that he's associated with to be in on it as well. And I think that's what's going on here. So Trump very much wants to go down in history as the guy who got North Korea to give up their nuclear weapons. And Trump also wants to make sure that he gets a piece of the pie and that American companies get a piece of the pie when North Korea opens up. And I think that's what's going on here. However, in order to do that, North Korea, they have to get some guarantees, and they have to get some promises. And I think there are differences within the U.S. government about how it'll happen. And I think that seems to be the issue here, that behind the scenes there are disagreements. But yes, North Korea thought the negotiations were going well. Vietnam summit didn't go so well. And furthermore, on top of that, if you add to that the fact that their embassy was attacked, well, lo and behold, North Korea, sure, they're testing their missiles again. And these are defensive missiles, right? These are defensive missiles that they are testing, basically, that if they get attacked, they can retaliate. So there you go. That's what's going on here. So I hope that the talks can resume. I hope that the trade can go on. Now, Big Haywood says, I just finished reading a 1951 British pamphlet about the events surrounding the Korean War. Sigmund Rhee, I couldn't read the rest because it went by too fast. I think that the massacre that took place in the lead up to the Korean War is very important. Jeju Island. That doesn't get talked about. Right? The way the Korean War is portrayed is, the North invaded the South. Well, first of all, there's one Korea, right? North and South Korea, that's like the thing that just happened in 1945. There's one Korea. After the Second World War, Soviet troops liberated the northern part, and the southern part, was occupied by the United States. So two governments were formed. And in the North and in the South, there was a feeling they should have peninsula-wide free elections, right? And that they would elect different parties. And then Sigmund Rhee, who was a general in the South Korean military, he took over and had a military coup and abolished the democratic government in the South and declared that there would not be any election peninsula-wide in which the Communist Party could participate. And then Jeju Island, which was an island that was a stronghold of Communist Party activists and trade unionists and Christians, mind you, right? Because the Christian community had been key in resisting the Japanese occupation. And at Jeju Island, there was a horrendous massacre. A horrendous massacre. We're talking like 20,000 people killed. There's a very good documentary, Ghosts of Jeju. Watch it. I mean, it was horrendous. And so this whole island full of people that were sympathizers with the idea they should have continent-wide elections and be allowed to vote for the Communist Party got massacred. And in that context, the North moved to try and move in and protect their southern allies, their southern country folk. No one ever talks about the massacre at Jeju Island, right? If the North Koreans in the lead up to the war had, killed 20,000 people for not believing in communism, we would all know about it. But the fact that the U.S. military advisors and the South Korean military exterminated a whole island full of people, Jeju Island, that happened in the lead up to the Korean War. That had a lot to do with it. And no one knows anything about it, right? But, check out Ghosts of Jeju. And if you don't believe me, look up the Jeju Island Massacre. I mean, it was a horrendous occurrence that happened. And that set the tone for the Korean War. The Korean War had a lot to do with the massacre at Jeju Island. And it's funny. I actually thought I might mention, just for the fun of it, I actually have here Kim Il-sung's selected works. And this is writings from Kim Il-sung over the course of, the Second World War and resisting Japanese occupation up until when they started the construction of socialism. And one thing that I think is particularly interesting is, so I have here, this is a radio address that Kim Il-sung gave in the founding of the Korean Republic. And basically, it was the 20-point platform of North Korea, of the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea in the North. And it was what they were for. It was their 20-point platform. Now, people would assume it's dictatorship of the proletariat and build world communism and the internationale shall be the human race, 'tis the final. Not at all. I encourage you, if you can get a chance, if you can get your hands on it, read the 20-point platform of North Korea. This is how North Korea was established. This is their 20-point platform that they established. Right? I think I'll just read it to you. These are the points of agreement that established North Korea. Number 1, thoroughly liquidate all remnants of Japanese imperialist rule. 2, wage implacable struggle against anti-democratic elements and ban fascist, anti-democratic political parties and individuals. 3, grant the entire people freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, and freedom of religion. 4, to see to it that the entire Korean people have the right and duty to form people's committees. 5, grant equal rights to all citizens in political and economic life, irrespective of sex, religion, or property status. 6, assert the inviolability of persons and their residence and protect the law and property of citizens and their private possessions, the right to private property. 7, abolish all laws and judicial organs which were in operation during the rule of Japanese imperialism. 8, Develop industry, agriculture, transport, and trade to enhance the people's welfare. 9. Nationalize big enterprises, transport services, banks, mines, and forests. 10. Allow and encourage free activity in private handicrafts and trades, small business owners. 11. Confiscate the land belonging to the Japanese state, the traders and the landlords who continue to rent out their land, and abolish the tenant system. 12. Fix market prices for living necessities to combat speculators and usurers. 13. Institute a system of uniform equitable taxation and introduce a progressive income tax. 14. Introduce an 8-hour workday for factory and office workers. 15. Institute life insurance for factory and office workers. 16. Introduce a system of universal compulsory education and increase primary, secondary, and specialized schools and colleges to be run by the state. 17. Develop national culture, science, arts, and increase the number of theaters, libraries, radio broadcasting stations, and cinema houses. 18. Set up special schools on a wide scale for training personnel required in state organs. 19. Increase the number of state-run hospitals, stamp out epidemics, and provide free medical care to the poor. 19. Encourage scientists and artists and give them assistance in their work. And number 20, increase the number of state-run hospitals. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I think I reversed it there. But regardless, that I have here, that's the 20-point platform of North Korea. That's what they took power on. This is actually a radio broadcast. This was a radio address given by Kim Il-sung, the founder of North Korea, on March 23rd, 1946. Right? It doesn't actually sound that radical. Right? You know, Japan had been occupying them. Japan lost the war, seize all of the property belonging to Japan. Right? Create a healthcare system. Take care of people. Fund small businesses. Protect people's right to private property. You know, guarantee people life insurance. You know, I mean, it's pretty basic. It wasn't that radical of a program. In Karl Marx's very famous pamphlet, The 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, he talks about the concept of mild in manner and bold in matter. Now, sometimes things that are very, very, very revolutionary come in very, very mild form, right? The example that has often been given is that often crowds of people that are on their way to cut off a king's head will be chanting and singing, "God Save the King," right? The French Revolution that ultimately resulted in the beheading of the French monarchy and a complete social revolution that completely ripped apart feudalism in France began with mobs of poor people marching to the king's palace to beg him for more food, right? The march to Versailles, where all the poor people, the sans-culottes, those without shoes in France, marched to Versailles, where the king's palace was, to beg him for food. That's how the French Revolution began. The revolution that began with people begging the king for food resulted in the king being executed and the entire system of feudalism in France being dismantled, right? I mean, we shall overcome. The civil rights movement of the United States that began with basic calls for the U.S. Constitution to be enforced, right, resulted in the Black Panthers, resulted in a huge social explosion like this country had never seen before, right? I mean, but it began with basic, why don't we enforce the law fairly? That sometimes the most radical revolutions begin with the most mild demands, the most plain, simple demands. They somehow unleash social explosions. Our Civil War in the United States did not begin with efforts to abolish slavery. It began with Abraham Lincoln taking office and saying he did not believe in slavery personally, but as president he wouldn't do anything to stop it. And Abraham Lincoln tried. He tried to have the Civil War not be about slavery, but by taking office and saying he was not going to allow any new slave states to be brought into the Union, by saying he was not going to enforce the fugitive slave law, Abraham Lincoln sparked the Second American Revolution. That often great social explosions begin with very, very, very modest proposals, right? Classic Marxism, they talk about the maximum program, which is socialism, and the minimum program, which is basic survival for the working class, right? And then the transitional program, which are demands that can only be enacted by dismantling capitalism, right? That you have a minimum demand, which is 2 more cents an hour. You have a maximum demand, which is the workers controlling the means of production. And then you have a transitional demand, which is everyone ought to have a job. Employment should be declared a human right. That's something that capitalism can't do. So in order to do it, you would have to cross over to socialism. And that these are the kind of things that have been debated and discussed throughout the history of socialism, about the minimum program, the maximum program, and the transitional program. And that, ultimately the transitional program that resulted in the creation of the Soviet Union was peace, land, and bread, right? And peace was the big one. Only the Bolsheviks were the party, they were the only major party that would end World War I. No other party that existed was going to end World War I. The Bolsheviks were the anti-war guys. Most of the people wanted to end the Russian involvement in the First World War, and so lo and behold, the Bolsheviks rode into power and created the Soviet Union on the basis of that transitional demand. Peace, land, and bread, the foremost among them being peace. That if you look at it, that's how the North Koreans took power. They took power on the office of, we're going to give everyone health care, we're going to build some new cinemas and theaters, we're going to, open primary schools, and we're going to, confiscate the property of Japanese collaborators. Doesn't sound that radical, but it resulted in creating a government that is very, very powerful, that is still in existence today, despite, going through hell and high water since the fall of the Soviet Union, right? That things are not always what they appear to be. The Bernie Sanders movement, for example, right? Bernie Sanders doesn't advocate socialism. He's very open about that. However, when you have crowds of young people, millennials, saying, not me, us, right? And recognizing the fact that there is a class of billionaires that runs the country, and that their interest is not the same as ours, right? Obama was all about one America, a more perfect union, bringing the country together. We're all one country, right? I mean, that was the rallying cry of the Obama presidency, right? We're all on the same team here, right? And that's what Hillary Clinton was putting out there. America is great because America is good, right? Better together, right? That's what Biden is putting out there. But Sanders has come along, and his whole campaign is about talking about the millionaires and the billionaires that are not paying their taxes. It's exciting. He's changing the consciousness. He is inserting into the national mindset the concept of class struggle. And with not me, us, thousands of millennials are saying, yes, it's about time we recognize that we as a country should have some kind of unifying vision. We should be thinking about the whole future of society, not simply our own self-interest, not simply our own short-term gain. We should be part of a bigger vision, right? I'm not endorsing any candidate. I don't do that. You all know that. And when it comes especially to foreign policy, I really disagree with Bernie Sanders. There are some things about Sanders I don't like. I'm not a Sanders supporter. I am an objective journalist. However, I'm saying, folks, there's something exciting going on there, right? The Bernie Sanders movement is very, very exciting. There is a change in the consciousness. People are coming to realize what is happening in U.S. society right now. That liberalism, neoliberalism, economics, individualism, capitalism has dismantled so much that human history requires a change in consciousness. So much to talk about tonight. I know a lot of you have joined us since the beginning. I'm seeing the numbers, a lot to talk about here. Someone was asking me what I think of Tulsi Gabbard. A lot to talk about here. But since I didn't say this earlier, since you joined, please make this a bigger conversation. We want more people involved. If you haven't tweeted this out, if you haven't brought more people into this conversation, do it now. Please tweet this out. Bring more people into the conversation. Join us. The more the merrier. The more that can be involved in this beautiful conversation here, where I answer your questions, I engage with you, and I have a discussion with you about what's going on in the world, the more the merrier. I divide those of you that are watching into 3 categories. Some of you are lurkers. You're silent. And that's okay. You're welcome. I'm curious about who you are. You don't say anything. That's okay. Some of you are fans, longtime fans, people who've been here a long time, people who've been part of this conversation a long time. And some of you are haters. You don't like me. You don't like what I'm about. You think I'm full of baloney, full of malarkey. You're all welcome. I love you all. You're all beautifully part of the conversation. And we're having a great time here. I am just getting started. I have got loads of water here. I've been drinking that diet beverage that will not be named, diet soda that will not be named all day long. I am full of caffeine and energy. I'm ready to talk here. So bring it on, folks. Someone asked me about the Venezuelan embassy. We're all watching that situation. Now, what I saw today that was interesting is that the water has been cut off to the Venezuelan embassy, right? They don't have water inside. But now on Twitter, the DC Water Department is saying that they haven't cut off the water. So now people are wondering, as the activists continue to occupy the embassy, as the right-wing, hateful, anti-Maduro Juan Guaido mobs are outside trying to starve them out and preventing people from bringing food in, as that goes on, the electricity's been cut off, the water's been cut off, but lo and behold, on Twitter, DC Water is saying, we didn't turn off the water, so who turned the water off? That's a good question, right? I mean, hey, I'm watching that situation there. Fascinating what's going on. I am surprised they have been here this long. I figured they would just clear the place and all of that. But lo and behold, these activists who are occupying the Venezuelan embassy and saying they will not allow it to be turned over to the Juan Guaido coup-plotting forces, they are occupying it. They're refusing to leave. And their occupation at this point continues. Very exciting stuff. I'm watching the situation there. I mean, those people are very brave. I mean, because, who knows what kind of charges they could get when they come in there and raid the place. Who knows what kind of violence they could be subjected to. I mean, we already see the Secret Service, apparently, according to reports I'm seeing, working with the forces that want to kick them out of there and working with the right-wing mobs. Those people down there are behaving very heroically. They're taking a stand, and it's not a popular stand. You don't win a medal. You don't become, student of the year at your school. You don't become, you don't win the Nobel Peace Prize for defending the people of Venezuela against the Juan Guaido coup plotters. It's not the kind of thing you become Mr. Popular for. So the fact that they're taking a stand like this, and their stand has gone on for so long, hey, my hat goes off to them. I'm not an activist. I don't do activism at this point in my life. I'm sure if I was, I would be there, but I'm not an activist. But good for them. This is quite an exciting move that they have taken, and I'm curious what's going to happen. I mean, I figured that they would be out of there immediately, but they're still there. And despite everything that's been thrown at them, they're still occupying the place. Wow. I worry about them. I worry about people getting hurt. I worry about how this could conclude, if this could conclude in a very dangerous and painful way. But the whole world is watching that embassy. And as much as you wouldn't know it watching American TV, less than 25% of the countries in the world have recognized Guaido. The majority of the world says that there is a president of Venezuela, and his name is Nicolas Maduro. That's the overwhelming majority of humanity is saying that, right? The overwhelming majority of humanity, despite whatever criticism they might have, says that Maduro is the president of Venezuela. And that includes a number of Western countries. Italy, at this point, says that Nicolas Maduro is the president of Venezuela. India, a very capitalist country, a country that's very close to the United States, says that Nicolas Maduro is the president of Venezuela. So this notion that somehow that everyone wants Maduro out, that's just not accurate. Now, I don't know what's going on here. My screen is frozen. And so you are seeing me as frozen also. That's very interesting. This has never happened before. But I'm going to keep going here until it changes. Let's see what's happening.